What is Kamifuda? If you found yourself here, then you likely already know and are looking for help to improve your play, or you might have seen or heard of it and find yourself curious what it's all about. Whatever your reasons, I'm here to share all I can so that you can burn as bright as you desire, young Pact Sworn. To put it simply, Kamifuda is part visual novel, part card game, available on Steam for about €10. For this video, I'll be covering version 0.10.49 of the demo. The game itself is releasing on September 13th, so I imagine most of the changes will be relatively minor since we're so close to release. So if you're just looking to brush up on the rules or get better at the game, then please feel free to skip ahead. Otherwise... Before we can really get started, it's important to understand a bit of context. When I first opened Kamifuda, I expected something where you'd attend a magic school, make some friends, play card games, kind of like if you went to Hogwarts and got really into wizard's chess. A fun slice-of-life game with a bit of hijinks, but what I found was much darker. Much to my surprise, this character on the title screen isn't who you're playing as. Instead, you play as faceless, but still has a personality and backstory, visual novel protagonist Tarot. Yes, after the divination cards, why do you ask? From what I can gather from the demo, Tarot is a high school student who, following the path provided by him by his parents, took up music until one day an eldritch force decided to forge a connection with him. This has, understandably, disastrous consequences. Right in the middle of an audition, his newfound powers flare up and end up doing two things. First, it caused time to dilate so much that roughly 20 minutes warps into 2 months. And secondly, it enthralled the 1,200 or so audience members with said performance as they slowly die. Yikes. So of course this lands him in witch jail, courtesy of the magical council known as the Pale Host, until they can figure out what to do with him. After about a month or so of stewing in the Pale Gardens, a Professor James Yarham arrives to offer you a second chance. After quizzing you on what happened that day and bringing you back to his office, he explains that the Pale Host is willing to offer you a probationary period to attend Glomrot University, a school for learning the Eldritch Arts, with the understanding that if you fail to impress the Pale Host, you're likely to be thrown right back to the Pale Gardens or worse. You reluctantly agree and find that the school is currently on winter break, so you have about a month or so to get used to your new home at Glomrot. Additionally, all students must be part of a club, and you guessed it, the only one that's operating at near full capacity during winter break is the Kamifuda Club. So after Gilshanks over here hands you his old deck and teaches you the basics, you're on your own. Now from here the game opens up, if only a little at the very start. You'll be confronted with this map of Glomrot and have a number of given destinations from you to choose from. Anything with a crimson outline is your next story objective, with everything else being optional, side objectives. And anything with an hourglass symbol next to it will disappear forever after the next story objective is completed. You'll also find that you can't reach certain objectives unless you do ones preceding it. The speech bubbles are your typical scenes where you learn more about Tarot and the other characters and make choices on what Tarot should say and do in certain situations. Some of these choices are small and slightly alter ensuing dialogue, but others seem to affect your relationship with other characters and are brought up in future scenes. Next, we have an image of 3 cards. This is similar to the dialogue box objectives, but also involve you playing Kamifuda with someone. More on that later in the video. We also have these question marks where you reach out into nexuses? Nexi? In any case, you reach into a nexus to add one of 3 potential cards to your collection, Vrain style. And of course, with this being a visual novel game, you can save scone to figure out what your options are before committing to a choice. Lastly, we have this skeleton coin looking icon, which is the card shop. Here you get to exchange the Eldritch Stardust located here, then you win after a game for more cards with this dapper fellow. Before we actually get into how to play the card game, I'd like to take a moment to really mention how much I love the fact that during the games themselves, you and your opponent are engaging in dialogue. This can, of course, be turned off in the settings, but I really appreciate how they use this time to give us a better understanding of both Tarot and who he's playing against. And dialogue seems to trigger at different points in the game. Sometimes it's as simple as being really close to losing, and other times it's because you included a certain type of card in your deck. Regardless, it's a really nice touch that adds an extra layer of replayability to each fight. Now, Kamifuda strikes me as both easy to play, yet difficult to master. Both players start with a 20 card deck and around 80 life or resource, and take turns or priorities to sling spells at each other, with the winner being whoever's left standing after the dust settles. As mentioned before, both players construct a 20 card deck with a maximum of up to 6 relic cards. Each card belongs to one of 9 different schools, and for each school you add past the first, your starting life of 80 is reduced by 3. So because the deck you're handed at the start of the game consists of 13 Exomancy cards and 7 Divine cards, your starting health is 77. as it doesn't matter how many of a secondary or tertiary school you add, just that you add at least one from a different school. But before we continue, I should explain what each type of card actually does. Sorceries are the cards you'll be playing most often. They can only be played in one of your 5 front row spaces, and each one represents potential damage that will be dealt to your opponent at the end of the round if your opponent doesn't stop you. When 2 sorceries are in the same lane, or column, they immediately do damage to each other equal to their power, so naturally you'll want to weaken or destroy your opponent's sorceries while doing as much damage as you can. Next we have Instants. These cards simply perform the effect described on the card before going straight into your discard pile. And lastly, we have Relics, by far the most interesting type of card, at least in my opinion. Relics are placed exclusively in one of your 5 back row spots, and have a blood cost that must be fulfilled before you receive the stated benefit listed after the completes text. The blood cost of a relic ticks down every time your opponent loses life while the relic is on the field. That said, even if a relic ticks down to 0, it will only complete after you and your opponent have finished channeling energy on the following turn. Additionally, at the end of a round, if a sorcery is positioned in the same lane as an opposing relic, that sorcery will attempt to destroy the relic in front of it before then redirecting the full brunt of its damage to the enemy player. At the beginning of a game, both players shuffle their memory, or deck, and proceed to draw 8 cards from the top to form a hand. Immediately after which, both players will channel their life or resource, until they have 6 energy. So even if your starting health is 77, you'll only start the game with 71 of your starting life after you finish channeling. Both players take turns, or priorities, to cast spells, whether they be one of the 3 primary types: sorceries, instants, or relics. When a player has a priority, they can play any number of cards from their hand until they play a card that has an energy cost of at least 1 or greater before priority moves to their opponent. When a player is unable to play anything from their hand, or simply opts not to, they end their priority, which means that they are no longer allowed to play any new cards for the rest of that round. But after both players have ended their priority, any remaining sorceries attempt to destroy relics in front of them before dealing damage to the enemy player, after which they go to your discard pile. These attacks happen from left to right from your perspective, regardless of who goes first. After all the sorceries in play have finished attacking, both players discard whatever cards are left over in their hand, and a new round starts, with both players drawing a fresh hand of 8 cards, shuffling their discard pile into a new deck to draw from should they run out of cards in their deck, channeling life into energy until they have 6, and completing any relics whose blood costs have been met. Now, if you want to get good at Kamifuda, you need to have something of a game plan or a winning image, a goal on what your deck does to win the game. Generally, you'll win by dealing damage, but you'll want cards that complement one another for a cohesive strategy to get there. And since you're just handed a starter deck out of the gate, it makes sense that you should have a solid understanding of what exactly it can do so you can take full advantage of its strengths while trying to play around its weaknesses. So let's do a quick breakdown of what your starting deck is actually all about. Now, your starting deck is mostly comprised of Exomancy cards, and they're all about drawing cards and getting more energy. This naturally makes a lot of your Exomancy cards perfect for mixing together with other schools. Cards like Magic Missile, Rune of Power, and Arcane Explosion all draw you at least 1 card when cast, while Energizer, Chakra Siphon, and Attunement help you get more energy with which to play all the cards you'll be drawing. That said, you should keep in mind that both Energizer and Chakra Siphon state that they channel energy instead of just giving it to you. You'll be taking 1 extra damage per energy you channel. Because your deck is so focused on drawing and getting energy, your deck without either of these benefits isn't especially powerful. This is why cards like Inner Peace, Warding, and Rune of Power act as a supplement for the deck. Inner Peace heals you 2 life to offset those channel costs and help you keep you in the game. Warding is a powerful 1-drop for its cost, but consequently can't damage players and thus only threatens to destroy relics and other sorceries. And Rune of Power draws you a card when cast, and if allowed to survive till the next round, makes the next sorcery you play gain 10 power if it doesn't have the Veil keyword. And before you ask, yes, you can stack multiple Runes of Power for some very dangerous Arcane Explosions that can reach up to 46 power for 3 energy. But in order to keep your powerful relics safe and help them complete fast, you'll need the aforementioned Warding, Energizer, and the Enchanter. As stated before, Warding doesn't threaten any damage to your opponent, but it does have a high power for its cost, so it can also be used to try and protect your relics. Energizer, a personal favorite of mine, has a low power for its cost, but crucially, channels 1 energy whenever your opponent blocks it. This effectively means it refunds its own cost while weakening whatever spell your opponent used to block it. And lastly, the Enchanter is a peculiar one-of in your deck that costs 2 energy to cast and has 16 power. the same cost and power as 2 of your magic missiles. While it doesn't draw you any cards for playing it, it does help you complete your rituals sooner with its Ritualizer 2 effect. For every 1 point of damage it deals to your opponent, it ticks down your rituals by 2 for double the value. This means you only need the enchanter to deal 6 damage to complete Chakra Siphon, or 8 damage for Attunement. With that, I've gone over pretty much every card in the deck and where they really shine, but I'd also like to take a moment to mention a bit about card counting and deck penetration. Because a deck is only 20 cards and you draw 8 per turn, you're going to see your one of legendary cards about once every 2 to 3 rounds. You should keep this in mind when checking both you and your opponent's respective discard piles. You can check the contents of your own deck at any time, but it will never show you the order of cards. Even so, you can get an idea of the probability of drawing a given card in your deck when casting something that draws you more cards. And on the other side, if your opponent has a legendary card you're concerned about, you can get an idea of how likely it's in their hand based on the size of their deck and discard pile. After about 2 to 3 rounds, both players will have shuffled their discard pile into a new deck, so you'll have a pretty good idea of what cards they use to try and piece together what their strategy is and how to best play around it. And now for some extra tips. First off, lanes generally don't matter, unless they do. And when they do, it matters a lot. Let me explain. In general, what lane you place your card in at the beginning of a round doesn't matter too much. Cards gain and lose value based on when and where you play them. If you remember earlier, I mentioned that damage is dealt from left to right at the end of a round. Now, you would think that if you reduce your opponent's life to 0 before they do the same, that you'd win right then and there. But the game only checks who's won and lost at the very end of a round, after both players have finished channeling, and whenever an effect deals damage to a player. So if both you and your opponent drop to 0 at the end of a round, the game considers a loss since it wants you to get a clean victory. This generally means that attack order is inconsequential, but it matters a lot if you or your opponent have access to shield or divinity buffs. Shield reduces the next instance of damage you or a relic would receive by the number of shield stacks you have. Meanwhile, divinity negates the next instance of damage you or a relic would receive, regardless of how high or low the number is. Now, reducing damage is nice and all, but what's really important about these boons is that they can protect your relics. Generally, the game is sort of like poker in that you're trying to win as many hands as possible, but relics allow you to give yourself an advantage against your opponent in future rounds. As a result, building up the benefits of your relic cards can allow you to snowball and more easily win games. But on the other hand, if your opponent is allowed to complete their relics, they can become much more difficult to overcome. This is where lanes and attack order matters. In general, you'll want to avoid ending your priority for as long as possible. That's because, as I mentioned earlier, once you've ended your priority, that's it. You can't play anything until next round. This includes even if you suddenly gain or channel energy by an effect like Energizer. As a result, it's not a bad idea to hold at least one 0-cost card in your hand just to avoid ending priority early. This is compounded by the fact that there are cards that do something whenever your opponent passes their priority. And if you've already ended your priority, your opponent is free to keep playing as many cards as they can without ever passing priority back to you. And with that, I think we've covered everything of note. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please give it a like so that more people can find it. I intend to work on more card game and story related videos in the future, so please subscribe if that sounds at all interesting to you. I stream Yu-Gi-Oh! On Twitch every Sunday, and I'll be playing Kamifuda all this week. So with all that said, thank you again for watching, and good luck.